title of my talk is Two Languages Single Parser, Russian-English Code Switch. It is a processing study which checks whether there are universal parsing principles that allow second language learners to operate both their languages in a code-switched sentence. Code switching is typically viewed as a feature of balanced bilingualism. It is defined as a cognitive state which results in code switching. My study checks whether second language learners develop this bilingual competence. The linguistic target of the experiment is an ambiguous relative clause like Bill called the mother of the woman that was talking about cosmetics. When native speakers of various languages get a comprehension question like who was talking about cosmetics, they prefer different answers. Option A, the mother, option B, the woman, though both answers are grammatically correct. To come up with answer A, the mother, the mind of the speaker needs to perform a structural analysis where the relative clause is attached higher in the tree. For option B, answer the woman, the mental structural analysis attaches relative clause to the lower noun, the woman. Such languages as Russian prefer high attachment of the relative clause and answer choice A. Languages like English prefer option B, the woman, or low attachment of the relative clause. A possible account for the established cross-linguistic variation comes from the implicit prosody hypothesis of Fodor offered in 2002. In particular, this hypothesis claims that sentence processing relies on the implicit prosodic information about the structure of the sentence. Thus, languages where high attachment is preferred typically have a prosodic break right before the relative clause. As a result, the relative clause is processed as a separate unit and is attached to the complex head DP favoring answer choice A, the mother. Languages where low attachment is preferred have a prosodic break in the middle of the head DP. As a result, the lower noun and the relative clause are processed as a single unit. The relative clause is attached to this noun and answer B, the woman, or low attachment is preferred. There is experimental evidence demonstrating that second language learners are sensitive to the prosodic organization of their non-native language and rely on it in relative clause attachment resolution. However, it is unclear what prosodic structure would a relative clause adopt if it code switches from Russian to English or from English into Russian. In our experiment, we would like to test the prediction of the implicit prosody hypothesis and check whether code switching at the relative clause forces the prosodic break that results in high attachment. In other words, we check whether a sentence that code switches at the relative clause results in attachment resolution towards the higher noun, the mother. Alternatively, code switching in the middle of the head DP forces a prosodic break that typically favors low attachment of the relative clause. Therefore, this type of code switching, this placement of code switching, should result in low attachment or the interpretation of the relative clause like the woman, the lower noun, the woman was talking about cosmetics in the yard. Besides, our experiment manipulates the length of the code switched constituent. In particular, code switching can occur at the very beginning or at the very end of the sentence, thus keeping the bigger part of the sentence or the part that supplies most of the lexical items in one of the languages of the experiment. Hypothetically, the rushing length of the code switched fragment should result in the Russian-like high attachment resolution of the relative clause. On the contrary, if the code-switched constituent is English, the longer part is in English, the anticipated attachment resolution should be English-like or low attachment. In full design, we have 4 places of code switching at the relative clause in the middle of the head DP, at the beginning of the sentence, and at the end of the sentence. The direction of code switching from Russian into English and from English into Russian has been controlled for. The participants of our experiment are native speakers of Russian, second language learners of English. They are college students who were exposed to English since early elementary school. Currently, they are obtaining degrees related to linguistics. They have some of their subjects taught in English. Their daily exposure to the second language outside the classroom is approximately 3 to 4 hours. To check for their proficiency in the second language, they were offered a proficiency test, C-test. The average score was 70% correct. However, there was a noticeable difference. Almost 50% of the participants scored between 63 to 80% correct, and the second half of the participants obtained from 80 to 90% correct. So, based on this, I decided to split them into intermediate and advanced by the level of their language proficiency. Russian native speakers, second language learners of English, participated in a self-paced reading experiment. In the data analysis, I used generalized linear mixed model where I had noun choice as the dependent variable to understand what preference for attachment resolution the participants demonstrate. To measure the processing costs of code switching, the dependent variables were reading time at the first code switched segment and the response time, or the time taken by the participants to answer a comprehension question. The independent variables were the place of code switching, the direction of code switching, and the level of the participants' proficiency in their non-native language. The results. To present the results on attachment resolution, I would like to use high attachment as the reference category. And first of all, I would like to notice that there is a predominant preference for low attachment in all experimental conditions. The place of code switching is a significant factor, and I highlighted the significant contrast. So, if the placement of code switching favors a prosodic break for high attachment, the participants follow this prompt and prefer high attachment 22% of the time. If the place of code switching forces the prosodic break that favors low attachment, this prompt is also followed and the participants prefer 15% of high attachment. So if the prosodic break prompts attachment higher, they attach higher. If the prosodic break prompts attaching lower, the participants attach lower. The direction of code switching, whether it's from Russian into English or from English into Russian, doesn't matter. It is not significant. The factor length of code switched element is also not significant, though surprisingly enough, when we have the English length of the code switched constituent, high attachment is preferred a little bit more, meaning second language learners prefer high attachment in their non-native language. There was a significant contrast with proficiency, but only when the bigger part of the code switched element is of English length. So when the sentence is predominantly in English, the second language learners tend to prefer low attachment more if they are advanced in proficiency. That opens the door for further research because there is definitely a tendency to to perform English-like in attachment resolution of the relative clause in English. As I have mentioned before, processing effects of code switching were measured through the reading time at the first code switched segment. The measurement was taken in milliseconds. The first code switching occurs at the beginning of the sentence, and it is significant to increase the processing load of the noun mother. However, when the code switching occurs from English into Russian, it is cognitively more costly than from Russian into English. Code switching into dominant language is costlier. The second place of code switching returns pretty much the same result. It occurs in the middle of the head DP, and the following noun, the woman, is read slower when code switching occurs from English into Russian. Again, code switching into dominant language is cognitively costlier. This pattern is not confirmed with the third placement of code switching, or in particular at the beginning of the relative clause. The code switching into English is cognitively costlier. The complementizer that is read slower when we code switch from Russian into English. I tend to explain it by the ambiguity of that in English, which is not the case in Russian. The last placement of code switching is at the end of the sentence, and because the direction of code switching is controlled for, the length of the sentence can be predominantly in Russian or in English. Here, same as before, code switching from English into Russian returns longer reading time, and it is cognitively costlier. There is no effect on response time or the time taken to answer a comprehension question by any of the experimental conditions. Therefore, we have established that relative clause attachment in code switch sentences favors low attachment. Relative clause resolution in code switch sentences is sensitive to the prosodic structure prompted by the place of code switching. There is no difference whether the code switching occurs from English into Russian or from Russian into English. Most often, we observed that code switching into the dominant language is costlier than in the non-dominant one. There is only one exception, the complementizer that, and I think it can be explained by the ambiguity of that in English. Response time is not affected by the direction of placement of code switching. I would like to conclude with a claim that prosodic prompts are implicitly used by second language learners in processing code switch sentences. Second language learners do not rely on their dominant language or demonstrate sensitivity to the direction of code switching in the processing of relative clauses with ambiguities.